Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Community Archives lecture, Tension and Debate. So here are weekly topics for this week. What are the sources of tension and debate within communities? How can community archives address tension and debate within a community? And what do community members want to see in community archives? So the first source of tension and debate within a community that we'll talk about is probably the biggest one, which in a lot of ways influences the other sources of tension and debate that we'll discuss in this class, and that is identity. So different people within a community may have different wishes for a community archive, and those wishes can be influenced by the identity of the community member. So a person of a certain age may feel like a community archive should head in a particular direction. A person that lives in a particular geographic area may feel that a community archive should make certain choices. A person that has a certain sexuality might feel like a community archive should be oriented in a way that documents the histories and experiences of people that have the same sexuality as they do. And so on with ethnicity. Level of activism, someone identifies as an activist, they may feel like a community archive should be engaged in more activist endeavors. And occupation, so this one may not be as common or as influential as other types of identity, but if a person has a particular type of employment or a certain occupational background, then that may impact their feelings about a community archive and how they interact with the rest of their community as a whole. So there are a couple of examples of that in our readings for this week. And just the sheer complexity of identity that community members might have. So for instance, on page 117 in the Ramirez article, the author is talking about Teresita and how her life was her life as an extensive queer transgender Latina in the second half of the 20th century. So here we have Teresita being transgendered, so we can tie that back to sexuality. Ethnicity, she identifies as a Latina. Her age, she is a lot older than the author of this chapter, who she's talking to, so that would be another thing that would complicate or shape how Teresita feels about the rest of the queer community and how a community archive might document the experiences of other people in the queer community. Geography, she's very focused in the Bay Area. So if you start thinking of all the different identities that people might have, and then how these different identities might shape how they feel about other members of their community or how they might feel about a community archive, then you can see a lot of potential for tension and debate, because again, a person like Teresita may feel one way about their community and one way about a community archive meant to document that community, and someone that is maybe younger, maybe lives in a different part of the Bay Area or outside of the Bay Area at all, identifies as a bisexual person and maybe white or black, would have different views about the LGBTQ community and how a community archive might document that particular community. It was interesting in the Kaplan article how the author noted that the people who were at the founding meeting for the American Jewish Historical Society had varied backgrounds. So they also had a lot of different identities as far as the composition of who they were. but they were overwhelmingly European and not Sephardic. So they did have that in common, even if other parts of their background were different from other people at that meeting. As Kaplan notes, even if within a community there can be particular subgroups, so people that may have the same combinations of identities or similar combinations of identity. So, for instance, a subgroup of people who are white and gay within the LGBTQ community, a subgroup of people who are black and gay, and so on. And these subgroups can have some combination of some of the different types of identity that we just talked about, and identity is a pretty multifaceted concept, so probably other similarities as far as identity goes as well. And so this really goes against the idea of a community always being a unified whole, right? Because again, these subgroups may interpret the concept of a community differently. They may interpret who belongs to the community differently. They may interpret what a community archive documenting a community might look like. And so there's definitely the possibility of some conflicts between these different subgroups. So not just necessarily individuals disagreeing with each other, but subgroups within communities agreeing and disagreeing as well. And what can make it a little more complicated is these groups do have things in common. So they may have just enough differences to disagree, but they still may feel some kind of at least superficial attachment to other people that are part of the larger community that they belong to. So kind of just enough commonalities to disagree and to create these areas of tension and debate. So enough commonalities to bring them together, but enough differences to make it more possible or even inevitable that there is going to be some tension and debate within the community about, again, what the community is, the community's experience, and how a community archive should represent those communities. And this tension might be especially true if there is one subgroup within the community that is really dominating these discussions. So, for instance, in the LGBTQ community, if other subgroups within that community feel that it's white gay males who are really seen as the faces of the community and have a lot of influence in how that community is interpreted and how community archives representing that community operate, then that may lead to a lot of tension and a lot of unhappiness from other subgroups within the LGBTQ community, and that can result in debates about what the community is and how a community archive should operate. One interesting topic that the Kaplan article explored was this idea how the identities within a community, so the identities of individuals, the identities of subgroups, are funneled into the exterior identity of a particular community. So Kaplan talks about how on page 136 that the shape of the exterior identity of a community really can influence by past experiences of the community, internal pressures within the community, and the society that the community finds themselves in. So the Kaplan article talks about how when the American Jewish Historical Society was being founded, American society was xenophobic and really suspicious. And that led to the Jewish community to really want to connect themselves with American ideals. I know it's hard to imagine American society being xenophobic and suspicious, but yeah, I guess, some things never change. So there really was a focus on conformity and patriotism, and a way to, or a desire to present the Jewish community as one that is unified and one that has a strong connection to mainstream American society. And they chose to express this exterior identity in the form of a historical society that was controlled by community members, at least to a certain extent. And that's not necessarily going to be the case for all communities or all community members. So the Kaplan article talks about how other Jewish organizations were very internally focused. They didn't want to really bring any attention to the Jewish community. They just wanted to kind of operate under the radar. And some communities as a whole may have little or no desire to explain themselves to outsiders. They may not feel like they want to sort of conform and sort of toe the company line as far as, we believe in American ideals and we just want to be unified, and we don't really want to highlight aspects of our community that might make people feel suspicious towards us or feel xenophobic about, us being in our country. And again, the reason why when the American Jewish Historical Society was created, that the Jews were so interested in having a exterior identity that was focused on conformity and patriotism and American ideals was, as the Kaplan article notes, they really felt themselves as being in a time of crisis. They really felt like they had to stave off external detractors, so people outside of the community that were suspicious of Jews and didn't really understand Jews, and also internal disintegration. So Kaplan talks about how Jews in America weren't really forced to be as separate as Jews in Europe historically were, and so the freedom they had kind of ironically made Judaism less of an important part of their lives. Like they could ignore being Jewish to a certain extent. And so this exterior identity that was crafted really was focused on giving an image of Judaism that people both inside and outside of the Jewish community would find unifying and acceptable. So you can see how the pressures that the Jewish community was facing, the society that they found themselves in at the time of the founding of the AGHS really influenced the external identity that the community created, the historical society or community archive that the community created, and kind of filtered away parts of Jewish identity in the process. Another thing that can cause tension and debate within the community is internal tension that a community member might be feeling. And this is something that Kaplan also talks about how, due to the circumstances that Jews in America found themselves in, they started asking questions like, what is my community? How do I belong to my community? How does my community belong to society? And you really could argue that these internal tensions that community members might be facing, especially during times of upheaval and difficulty that the Jews were facing when the AJHS was founded, can heighten these internal tensions. So if you are a Jew in America and you have more freedom to do things that maybe you weren't able to do before, your community wasn't able to do before, if your community isn't as isolated as it used to be, then you might start asking some of these questions. And how you answer these questions really can shape how you're going to interact with other members of your community and other members, or how you feel a community archive representing your community should operate. So for instance, an Orthodox Jewish person might answer these questions in a completely different way than a Reformed Jewish person. You say, you might ask an Orthodox Jewish person, where's my community? And they would just say, well, I really only feel other Orthodox Jews are really Jews. How do I belong to my community? By closely adhering to the Torah and the Talmud. And how does my community belong to society? An Orthodox person might say, well, we don't really belong to society. We're kind of separate from society. And, that's the way that, or that's how we want our community to be. A Reform Jew might say, where's my community? My community are all Jewish people. My community is society as a whole. How do I belong to my community? They would have different answers to some of these questions that are sort of more sources of internal tension. And again, this obviously isn't just true for Jewish people. Every member of every community may feel pressure or tension that causes them to really start questioning their place within their community, their place in society, and their sense of belonging. And that can really influence how people interact with the community and how they feel a community archive representing their community should behave. One connection that's interesting is the connection between memory and identity. And the Ramirez article talks about this a little bit about the flexible, fallible, imperfect nature of memory. And I think that memory really can cause people to experience and recall events differently. So this is something that the Ramirez article touches on pages 130 and 131, where the author discusses the experience of different subsets or subgroups of the LGBTQ community during the AIDS crisis and how it impacted them differently based on their sexuality. And so the memories that people have of an experience, which may be shaped by their identity, can in turn impact the identity that they have. So I'm of a certain group, I remember or experience things in a particular way, or I read the memories of other people who also have the same identity as I do, and that shapes my identity. It makes me feel more strongly about being a bisexual. It makes me feel more strongly about being a Black person that has AIDS. And this connection between memory and identity really can create a lot of tension and debate about the experiences of a community, what a community has been through, and can result in different interpretations of that. And this connection between memory and identity can influence how community members feel a community archive should operate. So if I experience or if I think things happened in one particular way because I have this identity or this combination of identities, then I'm going to want to see that reflected in a community archive. I'm going to want to see that story told. And I'm going to want to see memories that support sort of my understanding or my recollection of events that my community has been through. So that can be another thing that can cause tension and debate within a community, just a disagreement about what has happened to a community, what's going on with the community, and how those things should be documented in a community archive. Identity can also cause some tension and debate when it comes to the different activities of a community archive that I have listed here. So with participation, people who have a particular identity within a community may feel that the only people that should be able to participate in the formation of a community archive are people that have a similar identity, or at least an identity that's similar enough. So there can be a lot of tension and debate over who gets to participate in the creation of narrative that a community archive is involved in, and how that narrative is shared, and the overall perspective of the community that results from the creation of a narrative and the sharing of a particular narrative. So you can see how this participation really can be influential, because when people participate thoughts and experiences and memories about a community and the community's history, then that can result in the creation of a narrative. And if I have a particular identity or a particular combination of identities, then I'm going to want to see the creation of a narrative that at least in part reflects my identity and my memories and my experiences. And I want to see that that narrative is shared, and is shared in a way that I feel is corresponds to my memories and my identity. I want the perspective of a community to be one that incorporates my experiences and my identity. So participation can really be the groundwork for a lot of the things that a community archive does. You know, we've talked about participation in pretty much every lecture for this course. And so who gets to participate and who doesn't get to participate can be a really influential and important question. And again, the answer to that may differ from identity to identity and from subgroup to subgroup. Another source of tension and debate within the communities, especially as it relates to community archives, is the focus of the community, or the focus of the community archive. And so this is one that the Kaplan article discusses quite a bit. So because of the external identity that the Jews founding the American Jewish Historical Society wanted to develop, they really had a desire to focus on connections to early immigration and early immigrants. They wanted to show that Jews had been a part of American society and, you know, had been present in North America and South America for a long time. So they really wanted to have a sense of representational belonging, a sense that we were here. And they also wanted to connect to Sephardic Jews. And this is despite some major differences between Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews. So historically speaking, Sephardic Jews are from the Middle East, and Ashkenazi Jews are from Western and Eastern Europe. But the Jews who were creating the American Jewish Historical Society wanted to connect themselves with Sephardic Jews because Sephardic Jews had a long history in America, and because of that, they wanted to really highlight the Sephardic Jews in America, because they wanted to have this connection with the past and the connection with a group of Jews that had been in America for quite some time. On page 142, Kaplan notes that there was a desire to focus on secularism and not the religious aspects of Judaism. Again, this was a decision that was made to make Jews seem less separate and less of a foreign or different part of American society. Kaplan also notes that there was a desire not to focus on Zionism, so this idea that there should be a Jewish homeland. They didn't really want to focus on anti-Semitism because they didn't want to draw attention to all of the bad things that other Americans were saying about them and doing to them. And they didn't want to focus on socialism. So again, you can see a lot of combination between the external identity that the American Jewish Historical Society wanted to promote and what they focused on as a historical society. Now, it may well be that there were Jews within this meeting that did have strong feelings about Zionism and had experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, that maybe thought socialism wasn't such a bad idea, that were religious Jews. So they talk about how rabbis at that meeting really felt like at the end they were excluded, and there weren't any rabbis on the executive council of the American Jewish Historical Society. So it's not like these things weren't present when the AGHS was being founded. Is that because of the external identity that the Jews wanted to promote of themselves and of their connection to American society and patriotic ideas, they thought, we're just going to kind of filter those out and not really include them in our historical society, at least initially. And obviously, if you are a religious Jew, you might feel that this is, a very bad thing, because you want the religious part of Jewish life to be represented in a historical society which documents the Jewish people. If you are a Zionist, you would want to have that represented in a historical society that represented the Jewish people, and so on. A lot of the tension and debate within communities and related to the construction of community archives that is related to focus can be related to activities that a community archive might engage in. So when a community archive is identifying particular items to ideally bring into the archive, they may focus on a particular aspect of a community or of a community's history. They may decide not to consider parts of a community and parts of a community history as being worthy or welcome in the archive, which relates to the discussion that we just had. When a community in a community archive is collecting materials for a community archive, that is going to result in a particular focus as well. So as the Kaplan article notes on page 137, you might ask, what is the geographic scope of the collection or of the materials collected? Are you going to focus on the entire country? Are you going to focus on just a particular part of the country? Which historical period are you going to focus on? It seems like to a great degree the AGHS chose to focus on early American history and the presence of Jews in early American history. And so people may disagree with that choice. They may feel like, well, we need to be seen as a contemporary community, so why don't we focus on more recent um, aspects of Jewish society in America. And subgroups within the community as well. You know, are you going to collect from every subgroup within your community? Are you just going to focus on particular subgroups? So again, looking at the different denominations of Jews, are you going to focus on, you know, Reform Jews, which generally speaking are sort of more integrated with American society than Orthodox Jews? Or are you going to focus on Jews that really feel like they're separate from American society and that they aren't really interested in having much of a relationship with other Americans? How you preserve things is going to result in a particular focus. So what aspects of records are you going to try and preserve? How are you going to preserve these records? And so on. And the Kaplan article talked about this discussion over whether the AJHS should simply compile records and have them available for researchers to look at, or if they need to be more active and actually publish materials. So some Jews thought that, well, if we just have this stuff, you know, it'll save our history, and people that are interested will come and look at these records. And other people thought that we really need to be more active. We need to get the story of Judaism out there. We need to tell the American people how Jews fit into American society. And we just can't rely on people kind of stumbling into that. We have to publish narratives of Jews in America and really make this information widely available. The Ramirez article also talks about an area of focus. So on page 125, the author discusses some contestations over history and the history of a community and who belongs and who doesn't belong to it. So the author mentions Jose Sarria and how Teresita felt like because of Sarria's connection with white gay activists, he wasn't really the best person to represent the Latinx community. And that there were other stories that canon should be told about the community that were more related to the community itself, that hadn't been sort of tainted by the interaction of someone with a different subgroup within the LGBTQ community. So, you know, again, these decisions over what a community archive might focus on and what people and what narratives will be included within a community archive and which ones will be excluded can be one that can certainly cause a lot of tension and debate, because again, you know, if people have a strong sense of identity and a strong sense of their place within the community, they're going to want to see that represented in a community archive. Another source of tension might be the geographic location of a community archive itself. So the Caswell article touches on the importance of community archival spaces. So places where communities can reclaim space, both symbolically and physically, places where dialogue can go on, where community members can feel comfortable. And so you can see why where a community archive is located may be very important to community members and can cause tension and debate within a community. So if I am a community member and I feel like a certain city or a certain part of a city is really important to my history and to the history of my community, then I may prefer to have a community space located there because of the symbolic value that it has. Other people who may be a member of another subgroup within my community may feel, well, I actually feel like the locus of our community's history is here, so I would like the community archive to be located here. Now, it may be that community archives don't really have a lot of choice where they're located. It may just be wherever they can get, free or cheap, a free or cheap place to set up. But you can really see how this discussion can provoke a lot of strong feelings. So you think of religions, Jerusalem has important religious sites for a lot of different religions, and those are symbolically very important places. So there is a strong overlap between a location and the historic sense of a community and how the community views its history through a particular geographic location. So you might think to yourself, why not just put it online and have the community archive online, like the South Asian American Digital Archive? And that may be an answer to kind of not have a geographic space at all. I think that's certainly a good sustainable option. I think when you don't have this physical space where community members can go to, you're kind of losing something that can really draw the community together and have people feel a sense of involvement within your community. But certainly doing things online is inexpensive, and it may allow you to sort of punt and not really address some issues might arise if you choose to have a community archive in a specific geographic location. Another source of tension and debate is partnerships. So will partnerships between a community or a community archive and a mainstream institution take place? What would those partnerships look like? There certainly is a fair amount of skepticism towards traditional archives among some community members. This is something Ramirez's article touches on page 119, where the author talks about rather than spending valuable time in the oh-so-revered educational institution of UC Berkeley or in queer regional archives that lacked ethnic specificity, the author really had to go out and walk and talk and wait and really interact with the living archives of desire around them. So this really does suggest a lot of skepticism towards the ability of traditional archives and even some community archives, and a lack of trust that they are interested in or even capable of documenting the experience of people that have the same identity as the author. Some community members may feel that they can be lured into a relationship with even a larger community archive or a mainstream archives and just kind of be swallowed up. So, this is an anglerfish. It sort of lures smaller fish in and then it just swallows them whole. And so that's definitely a fear of some community members and some community archives. They don't want to be sort of subsumed within a larger mainstream archive because then they lose power, they lose the ability to represent themselves, and that might be a very difficult thing to for community members to want to be involved with, even the possibility of that happening. We'll talk more about partnerships later on in this semester. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case where a community archive is sort of swallowed whole by a mainstream institution. There are a whole degree of variances in what these relationships can look like. And again, we'll talk about those here in a few weeks. So having talked about some of the sources of tension and debate within communities, it's a good idea to talk about how community archives can overcome some of those tensions and can overcome some of the debates that might occur within a community about the composition and activities of a community archive. And I think a great way to do this is through community participation. So community participation in determining the identities of a community. Community participation in determining the focus of the archive. So again, who is going to be represented in the archives, what's going to be the geographic scope, what's going to be the historical scope. Is the archive going to be focused on simply compiling historical materials or publishing things based on them? Really having a lot of community input into what the composition and activities of the community archive is going to look like. Having community participation in determining the location of a community archive. Having community participation in determining the partnerships that a community archive might be involved in if they are involved in community archives. So a community archive may not even run into these two issues. They may just be online, so they're not in a geographic area. They may never enter into a partnership, but pretty much every community archive is going to have to work towards determining the identities represented within the community archive and the focus of the community archive. And community participation just allows for more voices within the community to be heard and for different perspectives to be considered. It can help people within the community feel like they had their fair share in any discussions that went on about these issues that can surround a community and the formation of a community archive. And it can really provide some structure and some value to tension and debate rather than just allowing it to go on and on and on in kind of an unstructured format. Why not find some way to structure the debate through participation, and hopefully that can result in a community archive which is actually better than if these discussions hadn't taken place and if this participation wasn't an important part of the community archive's mission and activities. And I think documenting the tension and debate within a community archive is actually a really important thing, or I'm sorry, within a community. And I feel like it is an important thing for community archives to do. Because if the community that you represent in your community archives is one that appears to be just kind of monolithic and can be tied to a very sort of narrow perspective of a community and understanding of a community, then that's not necessarily a community archive which actually represents the community that it is related to. And I think that you can really connect that idea with Jill Lynn's principles for a community-centric framework of archiving. So one that does recognize community complexity and flux. So to me, that implies that the tensions and debates within a community are represented in the community archive, and that people are aware that there are competing interests and competing viewpoints within a community, and it's important that the community archive is able to document that and share it with people, because again, it results in the perspectives and voices of multiple community members being heard instead of just one perspective that represents the community as a whole. So it just results in a more honest and nuanced portrayal of the community than would exist if these tensions and debates aren't uh, aren't documented in some way. So next we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about what community members may want to see in community archives. And I feel like you can connect this to a term we've talked about a few times in this course, which is representational belonging. People want to feel this sense of being here, of having a connection to the past, and of belonging within society. So people in a community archives want to see a meaningful representation of their perception of their community and their community's history and how they fit in to their community, and also how their community fits in with society at large. Of course, as hopefully you've realized by now, this can be very difficult. And it's going to be very difficult for a community archives to be all things to all people. Again, I think participation in the creation of a community archive, if it's done broadly and done equitably, can help a community archives be at least some things to most people, but providing a sense of representational belonging to all the different combinations of identity within a community can be very difficult. And honestly, the best way to find out what community members want to see in a community archive is simply to ask them, to have a dialogue with your community and get that feedback and implement it as much as possible. We can see nods to a few different aspects of representational belonging in our readings for this week, especially the Ramirez article. So in this quote here, Ramirez talks about testimonials or oral histories as critical acts of documentation, and how Teresita really felt the need to connect with those who had come with her and were no longer by her side, and those from recent generations who Teresita really felt had to understand the struggle and difficulty that previous community members experienced. So Teresita was really focused on providing an intergenerational dialogue. On page 83 in the Caswell article, the authors mention one of the value of community archives as being sites of intergenerational dialogue. And what this intergenerational dialogue does is it provides a picture of the past, so we were here, and also provides a sense of I am here. So, you know, I'm a part of this community. This person thinks it's important for me to know that that this has gone on before, and that can help fulfill a person's sense of representational belonging, just knowing what the history of their community was and how they fit in with their community and how they fit in with society as a whole. So this is the quote we looked at before, talking about the disconnect between the history that Ramirez thought should be represented and what the author is able to find in research institutions and even queer regional archives. But the author really felt the desire to connect with the living archives of desire around them. And I think that you can connect this to the I am here part of representational belonging. The author really was interested in having a sense that, you know, this community exists around me and I am here, I am a part of it. I'm walking and talking to people that were, or that are a part of this community. And that's certainly something that can support a person's sense of representational belonging, a sense that there are other people around here who have the same identity as I do, and you know, I'm capable of interacting with them. You know, ideally, someone shouldn't necessarily have to spend time walking, talking, and waiting, and making and returning calls, and that this information should be accessible in a community archive, and that a person's sense of representational belonging should be supported that way. But I think you can see a lot of reflection of the desire to have a resource that provides the sense of I am here in this particular part of the Ramirez article. This excerpt from the Ramirez article focuses on the need for community records to be shared for political reasons. So you can connect this to activism and a desire to improve the conditions or experiences of a community. And also, there was a desire from Teresita to have her recollections given professional legitimacy. And she was really wanting to have a sense that she mattered in history, that her perspective was important. And again, I think you can tie that to this sense of I am here, that, you know, what I have to say is important, what I have to say matters, what I have to say is worthy of some kind of professional legitimization. And a community archive can provide that. A community archive can take community members' memories and thoughts and really sort of elevate and legitimize them. And that elevation can make members of the community feel like, okay, you know, our history really does matter. Our community really does matter. And the community archive can serve as proof of that. The community archive can serve as proof that we do matter in history. And, you know, that's something that really can support a sense of representational belonging. This next excerpt from the Ramirez article focuses on, again, this idea of having traces of where we have been historically and why we may be where we are at today. So again, the sense of we were here, the sense of I am here. And also this desire to commit to records and commit to providing evidence of the lives of people from a particular community. And to have the courage to gauge the shapes and voices of the living archives that are embodied by archival traces and by records. And so obviously community archives can be organizations that do preserve and share traces of where a community has been and why a community may be in the position that it is in now. And through that sharing, a community can get a sense of we were here. We do have this past history and a sense of belonging in society today. And community archives really are testaments to a commitment to the record and a commitment to preserving the evidential qualities of the lives of their community members. And community archives really can be a vital resource in preserving the voices of living archives of people who are in the community and who have been through some of the events that have shaped the community. And by doing so, they really can feel or fill the need that community members have for the ability to connect to their past and can help them understand why the community's present is as it is. One more Ramirez quote that we'll look at, and this is just such a great chapter. It's probably one of the best archival chapters or articles I've ever read. It's just so well written. I usually don't quote from articles as extensively, but this is such a good article that it's hard to resist sort of focusing on individual excerpts. So I'll indulge myself one more time. So this excerpt focuses on a lack of repositories for queer Latino archives in the region and how most of the artifacts are scattered or unorganized, and often made visible only at the moment when an academic researcher and or community-based historian makes it a priority to bring them together for public display, consumption, and interpretation. And having records of a community scattered all over and really difficult to access can undermine the ability of a person to feel a sense of we were here, we have a history, or I am here, my society or my community is a part of society, or we belong in society. And so community archives, by concentrating these records and these artifacts, can obviously make the process of accessing them and drawing a sense of representational belonging from them so much easier and so much more efficient, rather than, you know, having to go all over the neighborhood to find history and recollections about your community, as Ramirez has to do. Ideally, you can just go to a community archive and have this place where the recollections and memories of your community are presented, where they're accessible, and where you can have a dialogue with your community's past and with its present and future as well. So we'll wrap things up by looking at one more quote. This one is from the Kaplan article towards the end, where Kaplan writes about how, in some ways, representational belonging, if it's taken to an extreme, may not be something that's really beneficial for society or even beneficial for the community itself. And this actually echoes something that the Flynn chapter that we looked at the very beginning of this course talked about. So Kaplan is talking about how history has shown that if communities really dig in and draw walls around themselves and constrict the ability of members of their community to define and understand themselves in multiple ways, it can really have bad results. And the archivists really should be careful that they don't become props or tools in this process. And some people may want this. They may want a community archive that draws really solid lines and walls around the community and says, this person is a part of the community and this person is not. And they may really want to restrict the ability of people within the community to understand that they might be related to other people, or that they might be related to other communities or other groups that are out there. So we like to think of community archives as being inclusive, but as Kaplan notes here, community archives can be very exclusive as well. And that can certainly be something that some community members want to see. If they are a part of a community that wants to be very exclusive and wants to be very separate, then a community archive can help make that happen. A community archive may develop a sense of representational belonging in a community or in community members that that really leads to a situation where people from the outside and perspectives from the outside are, you know, at the very least not welcome, if not sort of met with hostility and anger. And there may be, you know, some reasons for that. Maybe there are external pressures or internal pressures within the community that leads the community to want to have a resource that does this, but it certainly is a possibility. And it's one that community archivists and community members should really be aware of when they are navigating these different potential sources of tension and debate within a community and surrounding the creation of a community archive. It might be beneficial to not allow a person's identity or a sense of who they are or who the community is to override people that may have differing opinions. There may be a lot of benefit to making sure that there is a lot of participation in the development of community archives, and it's just not one subset of a community that may have really rigid and strict ideas about what the community is and how the community should be represented, leading the discussion about what the community archive should focus on and how it should share the narratives and histories that the community archive develops. So this is kind of a cautionary tale about what community archives can become if these different tensions and debates aren't handled in a way that is constructive and in a way that really incorporates the perspectives and participation of all community members, or as many community members as possible, instead of just the hardened few who are really interested in having the community archive represent one thing and not represent another. Okay, so we'll end things there. Again, tension and debate can be healthy, sort of like when I talk about postmodernism. If there are a lot of discussions about an issue, and if something is being done correctly or incorrectly, then that can result in a stronger community. It can result in a stronger archive, and an archive that does meet the needs of more community members than a community archive that is created without much tension or without much debate at all, because that community archive is probably going to be pretty monolithic. It's going to be one that is likely to have a pretty strong definition or idea of who belongs to the community and who can participate in the community archive and who can't. And that can result in people within the community who don't share a particular viewpoint or a particular perspective to be excluded. And that really goes against the idea of community archives as sources of knowledge and information that can fight exclusion and can fight marginalization and can fight symbolic annihilation. So I think we'll stop there. Yeah. I hope that thinking about some of these issues has made you more aware of some of the landmines that might exist in communities, especially when it comes to the development of community archives. And I hope that it's been interesting for you to listen to this lecture. So take care of yourselves and have a great week, and we will talk soon.